Zoom पे जाए. Sustainable Development Policy Institute ने, Pakistan China Institute ने, के जो greening of investments है पाकिस्तान में, और इसका जो transition है वो कहाँ शुरू होना चाहिए, where should it begin, how should it happen? Liaquat Saab, welcome. And how can we actually implement it with stakeholders, not only in terms of talking about it, but also working with the companies, the enterprises, to actually make sure that from fossil fuel, which is our sort of comfort zone as a developing country, how can we actually transition, and how have countries like China, who we work with, how have they done it? So this is a very first of its kind initiative that we've taken. And this workshop is part of that. And I'm very grateful to everyone that is here. Madam Zora Saab, aap aayi hain, tashrif लाई हैं. Mohammad Ayub Saab, Dr. Saab, Khal Saab, Vaid Saab हैं, Shajil Saab, ACCA से हमारे पुराने associate और partner हैं. Zubairi Saab, senior advisor to Channel 3 Gorges. Mr. Gong is a secretary of the All Pakistan China Entrepreneurs Association. Mr. Liaquat Shah from Ministry of Planning, and has been handling key issues in CPEC authority as well. So, and ACC has been doing a lot of work on environmental sustainable governance, and we've done very amazing reports in the past on CPEC together. And I think we will pick up that thread for this year, inshallah. We are joined online also by Miss Hina Aslam is there. And there are other colleagues who are also on Zoom who will also join us. And we will also like to share that after a month and a half, we will have a conference on this issue, international conference on greening the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And this is, of course, in line with the commitments of the government of Pakistan, particularly after the recent floods, which remind us that we are at the brink of a huge climate disaster. And we have to change how we think of infrastructure, of energy, and also of how we take decisions regarding this, because we are wired in a way for the past many decades that we need to now change. So this is the purpose of this. And we will also be engaging each one of you for that future international conference, where we will have some delegates from China as well who will be joining us. So without much further on the context of this workshop, I'd like to ask Dr. Hina to give her 2 cents, and then after that, we will go over to Ms. Zohra. We have a good panel of Dr. Hina, Zohra, and Mr. Liaquat Shah. So I believe Ms. Nagmana Hashmi has last minute had some other commitment, so she will not be able to join. And of course, I'd like to mention my colleague, Mr. Umar Farooq from the Pakistan China Institute as well, and Ms. Shamala from the IT, and our colleague, Mr. Abed, who also helped in putting this together. So Hina, if you're there, can you kindly take the floor? She's late. Oh, okay. Over to Ms. Zohra Sarwar.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to represent perspective of regulator of securities market, that is Securities Exchange Commission of Pakistan. And while there's a lot of discussion already taking place around ESG, in perspective of regulator, I think we've seen that there's a shift of understanding of how the role of a regulator should be in sustainability issues within regulatory space in itself. And SSCP has moved from its perspective of a very limited compliance-based approach to a more liberated view, especially in context of sustainability, as you've seen in the past, that we have now been focusing on the responsibility of boards to take sustainability issues as one of the core areas which they should focus for long-term success and managing the risk of ESGs in their boardrooms rather than as a side issue or just for the purpose of disclosures. Then also we've moved towards other gender diversity areas to put spotlight on presence of gender based representation in boardrooms and in senior management and down the stream. Then most recently, we had also issued some guidelines on green bonds and gender bonds. And the purpose was to start the discussion and, around how we can ensure that the market has the demand and supply for such products in order to gauge the opportunities that go around the sustainability. And as you know that in June 2022, we issued a very preliminary roadmap, which was ESG roadmap by SCCP. And the purpose was basically to start the discussion around ESG in a more holistic manner. While a lot of organizations are doing excellent work, stakeholders are doing excellent work, companies are issuing wonderful reports and ESG performance are highlighted, but there's no cohesive and central platform from which a regulatory perspective could be sent towards the stakeholders. And then also the roadmap and the feedback that we have received on the roadmap has actually kind of invigorated the discussion around ESG. And we've received very, very helpful feedback on how we should go about the roadmap. Again, it's a very preliminary roadmap, and the purpose was just to start the discussion. While we have set some milestone, but the purpose of those milestone was not to, restrict ourselves to those achieving those milestone, but the purpose was to move towards making more depth in capital markets through products, through relevant information, access of information, encouraging new entrants in the capital market, and also encouraging retail investment on this side, which we have seen around the world. It is gaining attention, and it is also a very debated kind of discussion. So we wanted to ensure that the discussion should also start from a central platform. And from a regulatory side, it has a little more weight. So the roadmap was basically, the purpose of roadmap was to start the discussion. And in future also, we intend to keep ourselves engaged with all the stakeholders, because we all know that this is not an issue where we can, fix one size fit all kind of approach for all the industries, keeping in view the diversity and the depth of each industry in itself. So the way forward for us is more to focus on engagement, on consultation, on being able to understand the real practical issues when we transit to a more sustainable ecosystem, rather than providing a solution in form of a traditional regulatory space. So in perspective of ESG, I think this is one for us. It is one of the key areas which we are looking for even in future. And as we see even internationally, sustainability has been highlighted as one of the main areas where securities regulators should go beyond their traditional role and focus on how they can create space and depth in capital markets. So this is, I think, one of the areas which we would like to focus in itself.
Thank you, Madam Zora. I think those are very important points which you've raised, and I think that these recommendations should be institutionalized in the regulatory framework. Perhaps if they need to be backed up by legislation, or if SCCP can itself autonomously do it, I'm not sure. But I think that these are very important points, but they need to be institutionalized and enforced. I think those are very important things of how to actually implement, because we all a lot of the times have the frameworks, but implementing and enforcing those frameworks and making sure that they are followed, I think that's a lot of the times the challenge. Thank you, ma'am. Over to Dr. Liaquat Shah Sahab. The question that I'd like you to address is, it's written here: how can the concept of ESG investments be incorporated into renewable energy projects? And has the relevant stakeholders thought about it, or is this concept not very much present in CPEC circles?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam. You have already highlighted some of the points about the ESG discussion in Pakistan. Um, uh, the point which was actually raised, Mustafa Sab, you raised the question about the implementation. So I first want to address this issue, and that is very important also. Because the problem is, the ESG discussion or the ESG concept is noble, no doubt, because it constrains companies, constrain companies' ability to pursue, uh, the way they usually used to do the business. So they constrain that ability, and they put a little bit pressure on them to act socially, environment friendly way, and create some value for the whole community, not for the company. So this is basically the concept of the ESG. But the issue is, for me, when I look at the ESG model, it's more like a multi-criteria decision framework, because there are three pillars. Within each pillar, we have principles, and in each principle, there are some criteria or some attributes. Basically, they address one or more principle. So the problem is, this is not only about the ESG. This is about all the the multi-criteria decision framework. So, because the criteria you choose, they are subjective, and the way you give importance to each criteria, because there is a scoring method at the end. So the scoring method is also subjective. Then the problem is, each industry, they have different nature of work. So you can't have a standard list of criteria, and you apply it, like Madam said, that one size fits all approach would not work. Because, for example, if someone is working in the coal mining, there are basically issues, environment friendly, no matter how clean the technology is, definitely there will be some environmental issues concerned with the business. But there are other businesses which may not be basically have the same challenges. So the first issue is the scoring way. The first way is basically identification of those attributes, because no industry would agreed on a list of criteria. Then comes the scoring method, which is very much subjective. So these are basically the challenges. And I think even globally, if you look at, basically there are different groups. UN has also their own way to judge the ESG principles. There are, for example, Global Reporting Initiative. They're also basically working on that. They have their own framework. So there is no standard framework currently available around the globe. And then comes also the quality issues, implementation issues. You already mentioned about it. We basically will make a framework, but how will we implement it? The reason is we don't have the enforcement mechanism. Then you go to the the company, for example, the famous example is basically, mostly they are quoted, the Volkswagen. They basically come up with they claim that they have implemented the clean diesel technology in their car. And after many years, when the data was tested, it basically was a false claim. So the test basically refuted their claim, and they have to pay a large sum of money in the US market, in the Germany, and also basically the reputation issue. So the problem is, do we have the capacity here in Pakistan to, not only in Pakistan, in all developing countries, do we have the capacity to judge it? Can we go after all companies basically to see how they score their ESG based on the ESG framework? So these are basically the implementation issue, and we have to look at it. Now, as for the renewable energy projects in CPEC or even beyond CPEC, definitely the NEPRA basically have already issued some guideline. They have already claimed that the CSR department within NEPRA, they have conducted, they have ranked basically different companies on the ESG framework. And the objective is basically to give them, to incentivize them and give them reward. So there is basically not a regulation as of now, there is no regulation, but there is basically incentive, there are guidelines. So definitely this is a good step forward. I think if we work further on it and we promote it, because in future, once the Europe and the USA they implemented somehow, then will come the constraint of, for example, for the exporting anything from Pakistan, they will basically be looking for the ESG score, things like that. So I think this is the right time in Pakistan. We should basically build some discussion around this concept and should work on it and promote it as as much as possible. Otherwise, for example, the individual, for example, pillars, if we consider it, there are the environmental issue. For example, we have the national environmental quality standards in Pakistan, but I think even in my hometown, for example, where marble industry, they have created a lot of mess. So they are not being implemented, not only in the hometown in Bonaire, but even in cities like Lahore and Islamabad, they are not being implemented. So frameworks are there, implementation issues are there. Then comes, for example, the social, we have the ILO, we are a member of the ILO. So the labor related matters, they are not being enforced. So these criteria, they are there, but they are not being implemented even if we consider the individual pillars of the ESG. So I hope, I think, from now onward, if we basically promote it, work on it, and enforce, create some an ecosystem for that, and oblige, compel them a little bit, not because in Pakistan the problem is the businesses are not coming and you put another administrative burden on that. So basically the investment will, will be in question. So these are the issues, implementation issues. So I think we need to work on that, and I think the idea is noble. We should work on it, we should promote it, and hopefully in future there will be some progress on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shah Sab. I would like to know a few things from you. You make good points in terms of the long-term plan of CPEC and in the upcoming projects. There are certain projects which are coming up in CPEC for 2023. They involve energy investments and some infrastructure investments also. And then, of course, we have SCZs and agriculture as well. How can the investors from China inculcate these ESG principles in their investments? And it's not only Chinese enterprises, it's also the ancillary network that backs up the investment, the Sinosure, China Development Bank, China Exim Bank. Because if we talk about this here in isolation, that doesn't carry any weight, because we are not the only stakeholders. And we will also ask Mr. Gong later about these his ideas about it, because from the level of President Xi Jinping, there is a very clear championing of green investments. In fact, I had the honor of being at the last Belt and Road Forum, and that Belt and Road Forum, and Prime Minister Pakistan was there, German Chancellor was there, Christine Lagarde was head of IMF at that time. She was there. It was called Green and High Quality BRI.
Yes.
Is that right? Hassan Saab. And it was very, very clear at that time. But what the gap that we see is in the following through from that level of policy decision making to the level where we are right now. क्यों सर? ये जो है शाह साहब, हमें जरा enlighten करें. How? Because ये हमने आज कोटा नहीं पूरा करना कि जी workshop हो गया, coffee बड़ी अच्छी थी और चले गए, ये हमने नहीं करना. And even if there are some difficult questions which are maybe not comfortable for Hassan Daud Bhatt Saab, but we have to ask those questions.
Okay, we are open. To any question. Okay, this is really a very good question. I am definitely the President Xi Jinping already announced that even they would not basically be investing more in the coal projects. But there are basically geopolitical situation around the world. Then come the question of then come the Ukraine war, and the people, they were all around the world. The energy crisis basically started. So I think even Biden, in one statement, he said that, okay, we want to, net zero emission by 2050, but the journey is very tedious. It's not like we have committed and we will achieve it. The problem, there are some obstacles in the way. For example, the Ukraine war, the energy crisis that started. So definitely they have to basically adjust it because energy is needed. And sometimes you think that even about the ESG, that criteria, for example, each criteria of the ESG, they are conflicting also. Sometimes, for example, it will be economical, but it would not be environment friendly. Sometimes, the social objectives will be hit hard. So these are basically, we have to create a balance between the conflicting objectives of the ESG principle. So keeping that in mind, the energy crisis, each and everything, we have. So definitely, even the Germany, when they made a plan that they will basically be shifting, towards the renewable energy, but they have to back out. The reason is the energy crisis there. The industry basically is need, cheap energy. So for that, they have, not the commitment is still there, but they have delayed it a little bit. And definitely, hopefully, in the future, when the war will be over and things normalize, so we will move toward, the renewable energy. Even still, there are investment, and the China is basically leading country in the renewable energy sector. As far as the guideline you mentioned, as far as the Chinese commitment for the ESG, definitely they have also the India, they have developed the guidelines. They have basically shared the same guideline with the policy banks. They have incorporated those guidelines. Like Pakistan, in Pakistan State Bank, they are also issued, green investment guidelines. So these are, as I mentioned, these are not regulation. These are only the guidelines. So basically, for implementing those guidelines, I think they should come up with some incentives also. And if there is an incentive, definitely. And when basically the time matures, when the things matures, by that time, they should have the regulation and implement it and enforce it. So the commitment is there. Guidelines are there, but I think it would still take a little bit more time to have the ESG framework implemented. Please.
Thank you, Liaquat Saab. I'd like to go over to Mr. Sajid Aslam Saab. From your perspective, how can the ESG disclosure be made mandatory in the current economic scenario? And from a corporate perspective, we've been doing a lot of work, and we've done some work on CPEC together as well in the past. How can, from a corporate perspective and from the clients that you're seeing, how can we realistically do this, and how can Pakistan learn from the China's ESG disclosure strategies?
Thank you. Sound right? Yeah. Thanks. When we look at the ESG as a So if you look at ESG as a one of the disclosure requirement, making it mandatory doesn't serve the purpose. It's basically there has to be economic incentive for business to adopt it. And there are. Unfortunately, when we approach ESG from a compliance perspective or making it mandatory, then it doesn't work. There are a lot of economic incentive which the world has already recognized, and they have moved towards that, and they have created that awareness. If you look at Thailand, is a very recent example which has adopted one report as one of the standard report for the stock markets or for all the organizations who have got a public interest. Similarly, if you look at the EU strategy for the sustainable textile, if you look at US from an SEC perspective, who have made it mandatory that if and all the businesses at least have to disclose. Thank you. So they have made it mandatory that minimum they have to start with the scope 1. That's mean whatever they are producing, that they need to disclose, and they are going for scope 2. And that's where it become interesting conversation. That means that whatever energy they are buying and consuming, they have to disclose the source and then the carbon emission coming out of that one. And then they are moving towards scope 3. That's been the entire supply chain of that.
upstream and downstream, they have to disclose what they have produced as a carbon emission, what they have procured energy has produced a carbon emission in that, and what the transportation and entire value chain has produced that. And then the ultimate brand has to own all the carbon emission. So if you look at the global scenario, so that's been, it's not only what I'm doing, it's also my entire value chain and my energy consumption that will consolidate that carbon emission, and that will be reported. Just look at this one, like invoice going from a textile from Pakistan will say this is the 100 units for maybe $1,000, and there's a 5-ton carbon emission you have to own. So you have to pay $1,000 and you have to own the 5-ton carbon emission. And if it's going to Europe and they do not have a quota to absorb that one, that's been, then there is a cost. They have to buy carbon credit to offset that. That's been $29 or $30 or $80, depend where they are buying from. And then that will add in the cost. So we may be cheaper in terms of price, but if we are transferring that carbon emission, that will make us like non-competitive in that market. So I think there's economic reasons why the businesses should start looking into that. Energy is the very big chunk once it's come to there. And if we say the entire energy has to move from a current fossil fuel base to the renewable, I think it's going to take its own toll and cost and time. So we have to start looking into the different transition plans. Recently in Pakistan, the Blue Ocean in Karachi, it's a Sindh, and the private sector, public-private partnership, who have listed 250,000 carbon credit recently in Singapore. So I think these are the kind of projects where we have to start looking into the project ideation and the project development and validation. So at least whatever we have, we can really offset that. So the concept is not zero, the concept is net zero. So if I'm doing something which is emitting carbon, which Europe is doing and the US is doing, but they're doing something else to offset that. And something else they are doing, not necessarily in the same country. They might be doing in other countries. Like recently, Thailand is supporting German economy by setting up a carbon offset projects in Thailand. And then it's invested, the investment is coming from Germany, and then the carbon offset they are taking away from Thailand and they are using it in Germany, right? So this is how the quota system is working. And why it's workable solution, because right now when I'm using a vehicle with a fossil fuel, after 7 minutes, that carbon which I have emitted, it's in the atmosphere globally. So it takes 7 minutes. And we don't have issue, our Earth does not have an issue of a capacity to absorb carbon. It's the velocity we are generating carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases and the capacity to absorb. So it's the process which is slowing down and generating heat. So we have to create more sinks which can expedite the absorption process. So Pakistan is very ideally located in terms of water, in terms of greenery, that how we can create those sinks. And even if we are using I'm not saying do that, coal-based energy projects, we can start offsetting it by creating those sinks. So whatever we are emitting in terms of the greenhouse gases, there's another process to it. So this process make it economical viable for the business. And the second part comes into the disclosure side of it. The most important disclosure which is required right now is the greenhouse gases to start with. Definitely ESG has got a bigger agenda. There are 600 plus standards and directives which exist out there. There are top 5 or 7 which are working. Pakistan also has got a national task force on an ESG framework. SEC, PSX also thinking about the ESG index, bringing in it. SECP is supporting and really helping them to create those products, the definition and the taxonomy for the green bonds or the sustainability bonds and their definition and at least bare minimum disclosure side of it. So there is a certain roadmap, but we have to bring it back the economic reason why the businesses should do that. And then the framework can come from the regulator, how we can standardize it. We cannot enforce it. Otherwise, it will just increase the cost of businesses. So the first step is the awareness. Another thing which is missing in Pakistan, Pakistan does have NDC, the nationally determined contribution, and for the overall climate actions. Unless until we start creating that awareness, it does not bring a standardized effort from the private sector side. So NDC is the base when we look at the SDGs, we look at the national priorities, and those national priorities are adopted by the corporates, and the corporates start disclosing those numbers and the information, and then it get consolidated, aggregated, and we report it back either to UN or we report it back globally. So I think the process which is missing. So there are bits and pieces which exist out there. It's the matter of integrating it, creating a certain awareness, and generating awareness specifically on the economic incentive side of it. And I think from a renewable energy perspective, definitely we should move towards that. But the transition is that what we have got today and how we can really build upon that. Even the carbon credit could be, or carbon offset projects could really create value, and we can also export that. So that's an international trade which we can get into. So I think there are opportunities in terms of the disclosure, validation, and all that. And there is an economic reason to do that. It's creating that new skill set and talent which understand it and take it forward from there.
I think those are very, very good suggestions. Particularly, I really like the carbon trading idea, because this is happening all over the world,
All over.
except here.
So we
And-
have an example, in fact, the blue ocean is one of a primary
Yes.
example which
Yes.
is already there.
People have started.
People have
Yes.
started that.
People have started.
It's just that we don't have a trading platform in Pakistan, but people are getting it validated and selling it outside Pakistan.
Yes, absolutely.
And additional revenues are there.
And additional revenue and dollar-based revenue,
Dollar-
dollar-based revenue.
Good,
Yeah,
handsome
right.
revenues.
Yes.
Even you see that our renewable wind projects
Yes.
started early on, they are getting the benefit of this zero carbon benefit, but they are not contributing that to our tariff.
Hmm.
They are just not giving us.
No, no, in that
We are
tariff,
continuously requesting that you are getting that benefit, and why you are not also the unit cost for that wind project, which started earlier, 10 years before, they are about 35 to 40 rupees units.
Yes.
Much high as compared to our other plants. But they are not still giving us any benefit over time in a basket price. The way the problem is the awareness and also the implementation. Implementation is available.
I think we should ask the Ministry of Climate Change also to expedite on this carbon trading. I think it will really incentivize, because you can make money, and I think it can be very good for particularly the corporate side as well.
And you can attract a lot of, again, dollar-based investment to set up a renewable project here and claim their carbon credit back in Europe or US.
Yes.
So even it can bring the investment just for offsetting the carbon credit, because they are running out of quotas.
Correct.
excuse me, in the energy sector, the private power projects which are being developed under given government of Pakistan policies, it is very clearly defined that companies are encouraged to have a CDM. And for that carbon credits, if they do this exercise, they get the carbon credits, then 50% of the benefit the company will incur and 50% will be passed on to the consumers. This is the government policy, it is the guidelines. So it is a win-win situation. It is a win-win situation for the company, because company has to make effort to get those carbon and to sell those carbon. If there are additional revenues, it is shared then. So this is a government policy. Thank you.
Got it. We have representatives from the Bank of Punjab. If they can kindly shed some light on the current regulatory framework governing ESG financing for commercial banks, and also their state of readiness for adoption of ESG financing principles framework, and what interventions can be considered to promote and accelerate the adoption of ESG based financing by commercial banks. Over to you, Ji.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mustafa Saab. Thank you very much, PCI and STPI and all the participants for inviting us to this meeting. Quick introductions. My name is Umar Khan. I head investment banking at the Bank of Punjab. And I've got my colleagues, Naeem Javed and Tayyab, who look at our project finance desk. Thank you, Mustafa Saab, for your questions. And being supposedly the lone representative of the banking fraternity here, can I have the hosting rights, please? I would just like to put up a few slides for the benefit of everyone present there. Is this screen visible to the participants, please?
Yes, yes.
Sure, thank you. All right, so in terms of the current regulatory framework as it applies to the commercial banks and DFIs in Pakistan, what we have right now from the central bank, which is the State Bank of Pakistan, is that we have green banking guidelines applicable for banks and DFIs to implement within 1 year of the issuance. They were issued in October of 2017. Broadly, they cover the 4 areas. The board of directors of the banks have to be responsible for green banking, and the necessary policies to this respect have to be developed. And banks need to establish a common focal department, so to speak, which is called the Green Banking Office, which is also supposed to monitor the compliance of green banking guidelines and the policies. Environmental risk management for all the financing facilities of the bank, whether they are to corporate sector, commercial sector, except for consumer financing for obvious reasons. And again, insofar as the paper goes, it is supposed to cover environmental due diligence, environmental risk rating, risk monitoring, reporting, and documentation. I'll quickly go over this, and then I'll also share what exactly is the current state of play at the commercial banks, just to be very candid. Banks are also supposed to have a development of a green market through tapping various business opportunities. And obviously, the idea is to facilitate and promote green businesses, for development of policies and portfolios. Banks are also supposed to re-engineer their own internal operations and procedures to reduce the impact on the environment and the society. Going paperless, looking at renewable energy, ATMs, RE branches, offices, efficiency projects, and so on and so forth. Just as an addition to that, in November of 2022, State Bank issued an environmental and social risk management implementation manual, and we are supposed to comply with its provisions by November of 2025. So basically, it's a 3-year time frame. And we are supposed to accelerate and strengthen development of our systems, which were mentioned in the green banking guidelines already. Only the social risk aspects have been added. And I see representatives of SCCP also here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but as per our nascent understanding, I think SCCP has also issued relevant regulations in 2019, and banks, obviously by virtue of being listed entities, we are supposed to present and have an ESG policy in place to disclose implementation of our initiatives. Now, again, I think as some of the colleagues, who are present in person there have also mentioned, there is no shortage of relevant regulations and policies. It's basically the volition and the buy-in of commercial banks as significant stakeholders and capital market participants, as applicable. We believe, and again, as representative of the banking industry, that by and large, most of the commercial banks are only doing it because it is being put forward. There is no buy-in on their own part. They are not, I don't think they're fully convinced, frankly, on the merits of undertaking this. And as it happens with most things, insofar as commercial banks, we are a large, unwieldy body. Collectively, we are about 40-odd commercial banks. But I think as my colleague Naeem will also mention in the next slide, I think that the commercial banks who have looked at it with any degree of seriousness, there will hardly be 2 to 3 banks. Other banks are only doing it more as a lip service. So yes, on paper, they would have all the systems, they would have the people, they would have the green banking office involved. But if you practically go ahead and ask them, have they instituted these policies and have they adopted them? I think most of them will be searching for answers. Naeem, can you quickly go through the current state of play, please?
Sure. So as of now, banks have developed their internal green banking policies in line with the guidelines of State Bank of Pakistan, but mostly these policies are in place, but they are not very effectively being practiced. And in an industry of over 40 banks, there are only one or two institutions who have dedicated and who are following these banking guidelines through a dedicated office in true spirit and form. I believe because these are regulatory guidelines only, they are not regulatory requirements. So that is why banks are not really pushed to implement them. As far as incentives are concerned, so banks had extended a large sum of financing for renewable energy projects when they got subsidized financing from State Bank of Pakistan. But these subsidized financings are also now on hold given the economic situation in the country. So a significant work on that side is also on hold as of now. While there is a demand for green financing in the country, availability of funding is a limitation. And out of 40 banks, only 7 or 8 banks have actually experience of extending financing on a large scale in collaboration with international banks and DFI, so that only these banks understand the framework of ESG per se, which is on very lower side if we consider, given we have 40 odd banks in Pakistan. And only one bank as of now is accredited with Green Climate Fund. And as we understand, just 2 more banks are under the process of completing their accreditation. Bank of Punjab is one of these 2 banks. But obviously, this accreditation process takes time. And once these banks gets accredited, we expect there would be significant flow of funding through this venue as well.
Thank you, Naeem. We also have, I'm sure, there would be enough expertise around the table, but specifically insofar as it relates to commercial banks and what little understanding we have of the countries close to hand. I think India and Bangladesh, and in this order, I think they are ahead of the curve, where we are right now. And a couple of things which we have also covered, taking cues from what these countries have done, we have also incorporated as part of our suggested interventions, which we will cover in the next slide. But I think the central bank, and I think what Bangladesh has done is nothing new. In fact, it has been practiced by our central bank also in the case of housing finance about 2 years ago. So the idea is, as I said before, a carrot and stick approach works best for us. So basically what Bangladesh central bank suggested is that a minimum of 2% of all commercial bank financing has to be geared towards green financing and 15% towards sustainable financing. And again, sustainable financing help desks should be there. So the core takeaway from this is that there have to be mandatory targets of sorts, or initially voluntarily, and then on a step-by-step basis, they can be converted into mandatory targets. This is something which Pakistan also did about 2 years ago in the case of construction and housing finance. And Securities and Exchange Commission of Bangladesh also introduced mandatory disclosures on various corporate governance issues. Then there was a $200 million Green Transformation Fund. Again, the idea was to provide financing for relevant infrastructure. And then there were certain other climate change resilience funds and a couple of other interventions also. In India also, and I think just one point I would like to mention, that the BSE, which is the Bombay Stock Exchange S&P 100 ESG index, was introduced, and I think one of the colleagues who is present on there in the hall also suggested something to this effect. So the idea was companies which were meeting sustainability investing criteria, they were exclusively the companies that were featured into that index, and the index has generated total returns of over 96% over the last 5 years. So obviously this works, this makes sense from a financial standpoint also. Lastly, given our limited understanding, and again, because we are practitioners and we are the ones who are supposed to be undertaking and projects on the ground, interventions on the ground. So there are a couple of suggestions which we would like to put forward to the forum for their consideration. Firstly, as I said, this is mostly lip service. If I'm to be very candid, in most commercial banks, this is mostly lip service. There is no real expertise which resides in commercial banks. We are all effectively finance professionals, but there is no ESG expertise in-house in the commercial banks. First, to develop policies, because most of the commercial banks have literally just copy pasted the the guidelines given by the central bank, which obviously is not the right way to go about it, right? So it has to be infused and inculcated in the entire fabric of credit evaluation of the commercial banks and DFIs. I think it's very important. So capacity building is key. And to that end, again, we are not trying to park a lot of burden on the central bank, but banks respond very, very favorably to directives of the central bank. So we think State Bank is in a very unique position to facilitate such capacity building sessions with renowned experts. To have sort of a detailed training program for the staff of the commercial banks, at least the relevant people who will be working on these interventions or these initiatives. On the regulatory side, we believe that central bank has a great power. So what it can do is that to promote or encourage investment on the green banking or the sustainable financing exposure side, State Bank can suggest or institute lower risk weights on environmental friendly exposure. So right now there's a whole classification of exposures, and different kinds of exposures carry different kinds of risk weights, which are demands on the capital of the bank. So to promote investment, sustainable financing exposures can carry lower risk weights. I think it's very important that banks should be held accountable to clearly defined deliverables, as opposed to, sort of an amorphous or an intangible type, general guiding principle that yes, you are supposed to have this. Again, State Bank can introduce phase targets in a staggered basis, such as which was done in Bangladesh, and deviation from these targets should carry fines and penalties. Again, nothing new, done by Bangladesh successfully, done in Pakistan 2 years ago for housing finance also. And again, as I said, banks typically, because we are supposed to be lenders, so anything which makes commercial sense, commercial banks will go for it. So there has to be clear discouragement, whether in the form of higher capital charge or other financial disincentives for banks lending exposures to environmentally hazardous industries. Again, the apex regulator and the PSX should introduce RE credits. I think some of the colleagues in the hall also mentioned this. We can have a domestic trading hub for this also. So one is, you mentioned, one entity already which is doing it out of Pakistan. But I think something of a secondary market for these credits for listed companies domestically can also be explored. Again, on the lines of BSX, right next door, our neighbor next door, we can have an ESG companies index. And that will also, as one of the colleagues also mentioned, promote foreign investment here. Much needed dollar investment, because we are short on dollars in any event. Again, some sort of medium-term program has to be there. So I think State Bank had a very good intervention in terms of extending concessional renewable energy facilities, and I think the industry really took to it, and a number of projects, both utility scale and captive, were benefited out of it. However, obviously, because of the shortage of funding, absolutely, so these facilities have been halted as of now. So I think the idea should be to not have a stop-start approach. We understand the constraints that the country is facing, but I think we need to have at least a 5 or a 10-year program. And the commercial rates, whatever they are, they may not be as cheap as they were before, but whatever those commercial rates are, they should be on a concessional basis to what the market rates are, and then they should be sustained over a longer period for the necessary results to come on. Again, I think is very important, stakeholders, the rating agencies, I think they do have some sort of a rating criteria, but I think the rating agencies together with the apex regulators need to institute a mechanism where, at least as per our suggestion, any entity should not have the possibility of achieving the highest entity rating, which is AAA, unless they have a satisfactory ESG performance score. So these were some of the suggested enablers and interventions that we could think of that we wanted to put for your consideration. That's about it. Thank you very much.
Very comprehensive and very good presentation. I think a lot of meat, a lot of key constructive points that you have. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation. Over to Mr. Gong, Secretary of the All Pakistan China Entrepreneurs Association. And sir, the question to you is, which metrics of the ESG disclosure are preferred by Chinese enterprises working on CPEC? And do these Chinese enterprises working on CPEC renewable energy projects have developed any framework for ESG reporting? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mustafa, and thank you, PCI and SDP for give opportunity to take part in this workshop. My name is Gong Dahui. I'm from Power China International, and I also serve as the position of the Secretary General of APCA, All Pakistan Chinese Enterprise Association. First, I would like to brief some related background. In 2020, China formulated the policy of carbon peak and the carbon neutralization. We call it double carbon policy. And China promised to peak carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and achieve the carbon neutralization by 2060. And also some concrete measures and some implementation plans also be planned. For example, now China strive to develop renewable energy, solar, wind power, and also nuclear power, and to replace coal-fired power plant. Now, actually, it is forbidden to develop coal-fired power plant in China. Besides, in order to address the instability of the renewable energy, China now developing ambitiously developing the pumped storage hydropower stations. At the enterprise level, in compliance with government's double carbon policy, Chinese enterprise also formulated and have been implementing their own action plans for serving the goals realization, the double carbon goals recognition. She also planned work out the quantitative strategic goals and the key tasks and the supporting measures. When it comes to ESG principle, ESG compliance, I think, in my point of view, China double carbon policy is in line with ESG. Actually, now more and more Chinese enterprises have their own ESG disclosure report system. Actually, in Chinese, we usually call it CSR report, corporate social responsibility, or sustainable development report. They have the same factors and the same topics in line with the ESG principles. As ESG has become the mainstream for the evaluation criteria of responsible investment internationally, a lot of institutions or think tank in China now develop the ESG disclosure report framework. According to the statistics, there are more than 100 institutions in China now doing this advisory work in this area. The popular version of this framework is referred to TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and the standards conform to the Global Reporting Initiative (GRI). And these institutions also provide consultation services and management improvement advice and support with respect to ESG in a long term for the Chinese enterprises. And in stock market, actually, according to the statistics in 2021, more than 30% of listed companies have reported their ESG. And actually, the regulator also will give some reminder, for the companies to disclose ESG now in China now. And whether to fulfill the disclosure of ESG have become the fundamental requirement to get the investment in the financing market now. And today we're talking the companies who are the part of the CPEC. Actually, Chinese enterprise in Pakistan also attach great importance on ESG compliance and adhere to the concept of sustainable development. In renewable energy sector, actually under CPEC umbrella, there are 9 renewable energy projects have already come into fully commercial operation. And in mining sector, in tar, coal, tar lignite, block 1, block 2, which is indigenous, lignite resources. And in Gwadar economic free zone, and in some industrial cooperation project, even in the financing sector, Chinese company abide by international and Pakistani standards on environmental protection, incorporating the projects into local communities development and help develop local education and local talents. In renewable energy sector, from my company, Power China, is a key player. And in Pakistan, we invested the Dawood wind farm project and built on the EPC model. Many wind farms or solar power projects for the local IPPers. Now, Power China went to the ESG compliance very much. For example, every year, Dawood wind farm project submit $360,000 to send the province workers participation profit fund. And Dawood wind farm also execute the policy of environment protection and employees growth, etc. And in hydro power sector, we know that China's Regodi's South Asia investment, which Mr. Zhuberry come from, built Karot hydropower project, and it got commercial operation in June 2022, and to provide clean and renewable energy to national grid, and they significantly reduce the carbon emission. I know every year China's Regodi's will release a report which covers all merits of ESG. In banking fields, there are 2 Chinese banks operating in Pakistan and the finance and CPEC projects. That's Bank of China and ICBC, Industry and Commerce Bank of China. And both of them arranged and participated in green loans and ESG linked loans. They are ranking in front places in Bloomberg's 2021 Global Green Loans and Sustainability Linked Loans rankings. And our association, All Pakistan Chinese Enterprise Association, also consecutively published 2 annual sustainable development report. In the report, summarize and demonstrate that how Chinese enterprise under CPEC uphold the concept of ESG principles. with the detailed case studies from 4 aspects. That is, 1, a green and low carbon development; 2, corporate social responsibilities fulfillment; 3, and the people-oriented concept, nurturing local talents; and 4, promoting economic growth and livelihood level. And the 2022 version will be released on 17th next week, with the collaboration with the Parliamentary Task Force on the SDG sector. And in conclusion, I would say the ESG reporting is essential for public getting to know the development of the CPEC, and also essential for enterprise to create the value for all the stakeholders and increase the adaptability for the outward changes of the work. Yes, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gong, for uprising us of the work that the Chinese enterprises have done and have been involved in terms of CSR, in terms of renewable, and in terms of climate change. Because, Hassan Saab, you know that this story we often discuss is not told of the work that the Chinese companies are doing with the community. A lot of the times that story is missing. And there's a lot that's being done, but that story is not told, or it does not reach a lot of the times the people. For example, a lot of the times people say only the fossil fuel investments have taken place, and there have been fossil fuel investments, but there have been a lot of wind power plants. There's a solar park in Bahawalpur, and many other things are happening at the same time. Now, since we are talking about renewable and green investments, so I think I will ask Mr. Zuberi to take the podium. Mr. Zuberi is a dear friend and very senior person from the power sector. He was the managing director of the Private Power Infrastructure Board and has overseen CPEC's IPPs. And then after he retired from government service, he has been leading the biggest hydropower company of China, and perhaps one of the biggest in the world, I think,
Yes.
because I've gone to Yichang
Yes.
and I've seen the dam. I think that's how many megawatts, sir?
22,500.
22,500 megawatt.
Big project.
China Three Gorges. So it's a pleasure, sir,
Thank you.
to have you here, and
you.
over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mustafa Saab. It has been a very lively session, and even today I have learned a lot. Let me first of all tell you that CSAIL, which is an offshoot of the China Three Gorges company, was established in 2011, and it believes on clean, green, and affordable power. In Pakistan, we are developing, or we have developed about 6 projects. 3 are wind power projects, completely renewable projects. 3 are hydropower projects, which are again renewable projects. Our 3 wind power projects are in operation for the last 3 years. Very recently, we have commissioned this Karot hydropower project, and now we will be embarking on Kohala 1124 megawatt project, and then we will be doing Mahal project of 640 megawatt. So we have a portfolio of more than $6 billion in Pakistan on renewable energy projects. We are very sensitive to environmental and social aspects of the projects. We are sacrosanctly following environmental guidelines of IFC, environmental guidelines of Silk Road Fund, environmental guidelines of China Three Gorges, and Pakistan environmental guidelines while we are developing these projects. We have basically done a lot of social work in the area where the projects are located. For example, in case of Karot, we have developed a lot of educational institutions. We have constructed a lot of basic health units. We have constructed parks. We have constructed roads. We have constructed basically water facilities for the local community. We have constructed about 7 bridges under CSR. We have published a detailed report on the CSR, which brings out the activities related to CSR, which we are carrying out, or we have carried out already in the project areas. So we have done a lot of activities in this area. And let me tell you that CSAIL basically is a company. It has a shareholding of 70% of CTG, 15% shareholding is from IFC, and 15% shareholding is from Silk Road Fund. We have a board. Our board has 7 members. 2 are Pakistani. This is very good, I think. It is very strange, or it is very unique that in a Chinese company, 2 board members are Pakistanis. One from IFC and one is an independent board. And CSAIL, all task is basically governed by the board. We have a CEO here. So a lot of activities we are doing in making affordable power, environmental friendly power to the people of Pakistan. Just we have commissioned recently Crore Power Projects, its tariff is 7.5 cents. And you can see the basket prices more than about 30 rupees at the moment. So we are providing not only clean and green, but affordable power to the consumers of Pakistan. And our board do the things in a very, very transparent manner. Our board has basically a number of committees like integrity compliance committee, audit committee, finance committee, strategic committee. All these committees are there so that all the work is done in a transparently manner. Thank you.
Excellent, sir. I think Karot is also a great model. And you mentioned Silk Road Fund, and IFC is also part of it. So it's one of the very, very unique projects, not only of CPEC, in fact, of BRI. Over to Mr. Muhammad Ayub Saab, who is the former Deputy Managing Director of National Transmission Dispatch Company and has also been Managing Director for some time of NTDC. And it's really a pleasure to meet you this morning, actually. And you seem like a very dynamic person. In terms of, the trends of ESGs in power sector, and particularly with power evacuation, which is your forte, how can we further this conversation in this niche and we've just seen Lahore to Matiyori has very successfully been concluded. Your perspective, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. And it's a great pleasure for me to have a discussion, a very wonderful discussion, and very, experienced person's discussion I have seen. And in order to summarize that one only, the thing is that how we will implement that one. The problem is the implementations, which is basically the big issue for all of us. And secondly is the awareness. Awareness, what I think that we should start the awareness from our basic institutions, like in schooling. Like we should have some lesson on this, that why our country is enjoying a lavish life with a unit of what Mr. Zubairi Saab said, that it's about 30 rupees we are. And we are not able to enjoy this one with this type of lavish living. As per the green energy is concerned, what I was very much interested when I was as a MD, and what can I do? I will do it. The first thing which I have seen that when we will prepare a PC of any project, like maybe a CV project or whatever the project, you should have a land, and the land is not completely covered. We have a very too much land which is available for cultivations purpose. So I think what I have done in NTDC, that we have ordered that if we have hired a 50 acre or 70 acre land for this powerhouse or grid station, and if 10 to 15% of that land is empty one, so we should make a cultivation of that one. The tree plantation should be there, so that we should have environmental change. So at the present, the problem is, as you know, that environmental change is so much rapidly affecting our life that we cannot imagine that one. You see that how the environment is changing in, especially in Saudi Arabia. I have seen that the deserts and the mountain which are without tree and plantation, they are now growing up with a green energy. So this is also a big challenge for us. So I think that in our all project, we should have to see as per the government policy. The government policy is also that we have to inject about 10,000 megawatt in our system within 10 years. And starting with in the next 3 years, we have to be injected at 3,000 megawatt from our solar side. Because the wind side, our sector was too much right that these are the mafia which are giving us a very high price, and why should not we should not be cross the limit of 3 to 4 cents for that one, for solar, especially for solar purpose. So they have now hired a big land in Muzaffargarh, and now this is going to be, inshallah, in a very soon PC1 will be approved, and we will start, and we have a plan that it should be giving the energy to us in 2024 at the end of this year. So now we have to stress that how we will implement this one and how we can give the awareness to our peoples that this energy is not a cheaper one. This is very costly, and we have to manage the resources, natural resources which are available with us. And I have seen that in KPK area, the PDO is doing a very good work. They are starting that one. They have become a model. They are generating the energy at a rate of 4.5, something like this. And they are starting with the private sector stakeholder. They are investing in this one. And then why not this, our stakeholder should be put into this group, and they should have a incentive of that one. And the very good suggestion which is given that if we are getting a carbon deposit free incentive to some other place, so why not should not be begin to some other place? Like this is the policy which is also the government want with through a CTBCM policy. You know that CTBCM is such type of policy that if you are getting this benefit and you are bringing that tariff in a very cheaper rate, then you will be given the first preference that you will come, your generator will be on the system. So I think this policy is a very good one, and we are now on a right track with our professionals. So we have to improve with this one, and we give us the awareness to all of us. The government has given the policy. Then we have a challenge that we have how we will inject this 10,000 megawatt in our system. And after injecting this 10,000 megawatt system, we can bring our tariff to some extent to a lower price. So I think this is the our policy, and we have to do as much as we can do with this through awareness of our system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Now I'd like to go over to Mr. Hassan Daud Bhatt sir. Sir, a question that I'd like you to address is that what is the future of investing in Pakistan, and will ESG disclosure impact the amount of FDI into CPEC projects? Will CPEC projects attract third parties once they are mandatory ESG disclosures? And from a perspective of CPEC, and you've been working on CPEC for a while as the project director, and then you were in the KP Board of Investment as well. How can we, and before you arrived, we also discussed this, how can we realistically achieve greener investments from China, where they can actually be materialized into actual green investments? Over to you, sir.
I think brilliant question. And first of all, let me thank each one of you. I mean, very candid and very realistic, including our colleague from the Bank of Khyber. And I think they're pertinent with the Bank of Punjab, sorry. KP. Yeah. Once in Khyber is always in Khyber. The Bank of Punjab, yes. And also all of them, our senior colleague also, and I think what we've heard from this. But can you allow me to give you the larger framework in which, I think we've spoken as people representing the energy sector, SECP, but I think there are three aspects of this. And somehow or the other, and not just now, but since its inception, somehow or the other, our ESG has been focusing entirely on E part. I think the S and the G part is my concern. It's my concern because now, because I've seen with eminent speakers from the energy sector. For me, my concern is the S part and the G part, because that impacts me more as a consumer. And as perhaps representing AJK, for example, because I belong to AJK, looking at projects with my own lens and I look at projects as a project management specialist, because I teach projects management. I have started, and just this time when I joined Barry University, I included ESG and sustainable as an essential part of my curriculum. And there were discussions around that, but I was able to actually impose that as one of the subject that we essentially need as part of the monitoring and evaluation concept. But I think from a consumer standpoint, I look at ESG at various stages, from the implementation of the project to the closure of the project, and then the operation later when you do these projects. What I would like to earnestly request each one of you, and also our regulators from SECP, and perhaps it would have been better if State Bank was also here, that we should not do this because the world is speaking about this. We said this when the world was speaking about climate change and its impact, and we said, it won't impact us. It will impact us. And I think we have and Pakistani and the frequently asked questions that I have faced, and I'm sure my colleague Mustafa here would also second me on this. People ask us question, very trivial and simple question. What is the employment generation rate for Pakistanis? How many engineers have been employed? How many women have been employed? These are simple questions. Nobody talks about environment. Yes, in boardroom of a 5-star hotel, you talk of environment. But when you go at project site, they talk about kitni naukriyan hamare liye hui, kitne, and I believe, yes, we want building school is important, but for me, I think the first sustainable element is employment creation. And I would urge my colleagues from China, because next for me, what has happened in energy is past, and I don't look at past, I look at future. For me now, the B to B concept is coming, and that would be very challenging, because there'll be good companies and there'll be bad companies here. And also when we do B2B in China, when we go, we should be as responsible as the Chinese are, because Chinese, based on the government regulation and how the government deals with the way that things are done. I think in Pakistan also, when we talk, and I think SECP's role, and also role of State Bank and all the banks, Bank of Punjab also is very critical, because when merger and acquisitions will happen, and they will happen, when joint ventures in the B2B side will happen, and they will happen, your role will be very critical. I think the role of the regulators will be very critical. And of course, our role as a customer will also be critical. Because we should also know our rights. What are our rights? And I think it's government's role to actually guide and tell people what are what are the guidelines, what are the government's guidelines, and what are the frameworks in very simple languages, perhaps in KP, in Pashto, and perhaps in Punjab, in Punjabi, and perhaps in Urdu, that what are the guidelines available, and how can I protect my right on the social part and also on the governance part. And also because we have had challenges on the labor side. I will not mince my word. We have had challenges on our capacity as Pakistanis to actually understand what are our rights when we work on Chinese, because here there's dearth of opportunity. So anyone getting a job would say, okay, theek hai. What are the pay structure? What are the governance structure? How will that be actually supporting Pakistan and we can learn so easily from our colleagues from China, because how do they look at things? And also because I have always been a bridge between China and Pakistan. I would also urge my colleagues from China and all, because he represents the body which I think you should look at Pakistani, because now we're working in a cross-cultural environment, and there are challenges of cross-cultural environment. There are challenges for understanding the culture. So for those companies who have worked here, brilliant, they have long history, like CRBC, like your company, so you have had history, you understand Pakistan. My request to you, sir, and to all the people who are involved in the B2B phase, and including Board of Investment and including the government, even the Ministry of Commerce and State Bank and all the regulators, is that be careful when these joint ventures happen. Be careful in terms of ESG when very good companies from China. And I remember Jack Ma, when we met Jack Ma, and I was with the delegation, and we requested him to, and I'm creating an analogy from there, and I'll be a little bit longish because of my selfish reasons. When two of our former prime ministers went and met Jack Ma, because it was quite convenient to meet him for us. I think we had good liaison from our embassy there. Each time we used to ask him that please come to Pakistan and invest. Yes, I'm ready to invest. Are you ready to accept me to invest in Pakistan? Because when I come, there will be pressure on retail. There will be pressure on your existing markets. So when these companies come, which are big in size, big in their equity and their models, and big in terms of their exposure, how many companies here do have the capacity to do joint ventures with them? Very few, very minimal. Are we as regulators, because we speak about things, but it's this, we don't live in nirvana, we live in practical world. So how many companies are we preparing to do joint ventures with them? There's huge market in KP for mines and minerals. There are Chinese working on mining. And this is, the state of ESG in the mining sector is horrifying, not just with Chinese, with anyone there. I'm sorry, we were supposed to talk of energy, but then energy stems from, yeah, I'm sure you it's my duty, isn't it? And also it's our collective, because each one of the person who's sitting on this table, including yourself and my colleagues who are sitting behind, we have worked on CPEC. We have given our last 10 years, and as this is the 10th year, and I think from moving forward, we should look at the narratives that those were built, and also the challenges that will come forward. So, and also we should not invest in solar companies because we need greener energy. What are the risks associated with having solar power plants here? Have we kept and now when we ask Chinese or anyone who comes here, when we say that please implement ESG, implement these regulations, then they can easily ask us, are you implementing the incentives that you had promised to us when you asked us to come to Pakistan? I think that is also important. And also religion wise also, it's important that each time when there is a high level state visit to China, we open the box for the revolving account. And then whole year we keep talking about that, isn't it, sir? So I think we should be and now coming to the enterprise level, this is on the regulatory part. On the enterprise level, I would request that not just in a boardroom that we should be talking about. And I think Mustafa was very right in saying that these things should be told to the people. And how can we tell this to the people? By being more transparent, by being more visible, by creating opportunity. And why is this has to come in a presentation? Why can't the people living there? You tell 100 stories about Gwadar and Gwadar Port and the trees that have been planted. But when people sit there and ask for water, the entire story is lost. The entire structure around S&G is lost. Environment, yes, we are cognizant of our responsibility. Pakistan have done exceedingly well in terms of our responsibility, not in terms of perhaps littering our roads, but perhaps in the energy sector we have done well. We've been quite responsible. Our carbon emission and the technology is up. Mustafa, you keep speaking about supercritical technology. I think we were wise. Our leaders were wise when they selected the environment. Besides this, I would also urge, especially because I go and interact with universities and students in GB, I interact with AJK and nationwide. I think we should also be careful on the biodiversity part in this. That's exceedingly important. I mean, we can talk because our focus remains on E because that's the visible part. But I think on the biodiversity, China is that's part of E, but somehow E is on the green greener. But I think biodiversity in terms, and I think what we can do as part of Pakistan government, and also you have great links, and Senator Saab speaks about this also. I think we must tell our government the opportunities that are low. Actually, I've got allergic to the word low hanging. I think we should pick up the fruit which are lying on the ground and getting rotten. At least eat those. वो low hanging के लिए बड़ी effort करनी पड़ती है तोड़ने के लिए. So let's forget about the effort that's beyond our capacity perhaps. So I think in terms of जो जमीन पे गिरे हुए हैं, जिस तरह global development initiative, and Mustafa has spoken about this, Liaquat has spoken about this at national forum. I think GDI को बहुत carefully पढ़ो. उसके अंदर पाकिस्तान के लिए financing और investment wise huge opportunity है. China is a responsible state. China will not invest in green area, but again, we should also be very responsible, especially in the B2B part, that we should not become the dumping ground. We have been dumping ground for plastics. We cannot be dumping ground for industry. We should accept only those industry and power plants which have an age perhaps lesser than 10 years. We should be careful on our energy standards. We are #1 country. We should be given Nishan-e-Haider for making a lot of policies. But we should be, and my colleague spoke about carrot and stick, enough of carrots, now stick time for implementing. जी, तो environment से जाम भाग गए हूँ. जी, या जो भी आप.
That's historically that's true, but Nishan-e-Haider does not have a condition. It's not the condition. Yeah, there's a precedent that most of the people who got,
and I
they are
think
not
stick wise, not just for us. ACCA. Yeah. So let me just complete my last part. Last thing is on the stick. I think I've made my point. The stick part on the implementation of policies. I think we need implementation of policy, and it's not true for China only. It's not true for Pakistan. It's true for any third party investment. I think we must tell the Europeans, we must tell anyone who wants to invest in China, Pakistan, that we are open to any third party. CPEC is also open to any third party investment, responsible investment, green investment, sustainable investment. And I think for us moving forward, even the board of investment should be termed as board of sustainable investment. We should only accept sustainable green investment, nothing else. Otherwise, we should encourage our own people with money to invest in the sector. So thank you so much.
Mustafa, if I can add a couple of things there. Sorry, just to add a couple of things. I'm an ESG investing professional, by the way, other than the accounting side of it. I think a couple of things which are important here as an opportunity which you picked up, like there was an IT ride and there was a industry 4.0 ride and the AI. I think there's another thing which is a very great opportunity for countries like Pakistan. Even when we pick up the textile, we pick up any other sector in partnership with China. China is going through the same phase. In fact, the rest of the world is going from a similar phase. Anybody who can win the race and who can pick up a couple of industry and can be a champion of ESG, not only E, but the ESG, I think that's where the things will change. So if we want to be a part of a global trade, and China has got a big interest in and a share in the global trade, I think that's a time where we can even create that capacity to help the organization in China, because they need that. So that capacity doesn't exist. Anytime you go on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn a very restricted forum, so they are looking for anywhere between 40 to 60,000 ESG related job. US is short by 400,000 from an ESG and sustainability related side. And the most interesting part, it's not going to driven through regulation. There are two key drivers who are driving the sustainability focus is the investor and the consumer. The Zara has promised their consumer that they will not give anything which is not transparent and which is not sustainable. And that's mean any textile piece going from Pakistan, they have to verify whether the corn which was grown was sustainable or not, because Rafan has to create the starch, and starch is being used in textile, and textile is going there. So it's a circular economy which need to be implemented in a right way. So that's the link which exists there. Energy is a part of it, and energy is not electricity only. Energy has got other components there as well. Second part, there's in the next 10 years, the major wealth is being inherited by very young millennials. So 68 trillion in the next 7-8 years is being transferred to millennials who are very eco-sensitive. And 15 trillion out of that is happening in Asia. So that's been all the investor when they are making a decision to invest, and they are the premium consumer at the same time. They are making the demand that I'll invest in something which is sustainable. That's been all the bank. And I know one of a bank in Pakistan is struggling because their international portfolio investors are saying, we will pull out if your ESG score doesn't hit a certain level, right? So these are the things already happening. In the US and Europe, there are companies and investment banker who have started using conservation of a real estate as a separate asset class. And they are selling it to the public. They are making a real estate investments, but through the conservation, they are getting the tax incentive, and they are attracting these new high net worth individuals. So I think there are products and the economic reasons to adopt that. Regulator in any country cannot make it mandatory. Regulators' role is to make it standardized, make it easy, make sure that there's a taxonomy. People can get the information while making a decision, because there are a lot of labeling and the green labeling happening in Europe, which ultimately happened like the Volkswagen example you came out, and then there was a food company who claimed that sustainable one, and they were fined because it's not right. So regulator role is to standardize and make sure the information is there. They cannot make it mandatory that adopt the sustainability unless until there is an economic benefit. So the business has to make sense for them. And it does make sense. It's just that people are not aware of that innovation which is happening across the board.
Can I just make one recommendation? I think PCI, SDPI, and ESG, because all three are supported by SDPI and perhaps statement and to build a platform for capacity building. And I think even Bank of Punjab, Umar, aap support us on this. You've been supporting on the blue economy. So, Umar, perhaps you did not hear. I would recommend and request that we should set up a platform from here led by PCI and SDPI and ACCI. I mean, 3 joint leaders, supported by SCCP and perhaps Bank of Punjab in building capacities on the ESG part across the country. I mean, the huge potential at Karachi, Lahore, not just in urban center. Let's look at some of the other economies in GB and AJK. So आप इसमें करें, and perhaps आप you can, and Sir Khalid bhai, आप set up an MOU and we can sign this MOU ASAP. I think this will be our contribution. Otherwise, discussion happens and we keep doing.
इसमें एक जर्मन है प्रेसिडेंट है एक प्राइवेट चैम्बर का, जो क्लेम करते हैं कि उसके पास 2000 कंपनीज हैं इस चैम्बर में। तो उसने भी कमेंट किया है हमारे साथ कि वो ESG के ऊपर जो है ना पाकिस्तान में कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग के लिए रेडी है। तो वी आर इन टच विद वोल्कर, हिज नेम इज बेसिकली फ्रेडरिक वोल्कर। हाँ, तो वो भी आ सकते हैं इसी तरह का। ठीक है, ठीक है।
I think Germany, sorry, just adding back, but Germany has got a major issue in terms of their quota, in terms of the GHG, and they are looking to work with the other countries so they can have some projects which can generate carbon offset.
Absolutely.
So it's a very good
Yeah.
opportunity for
Yeah.
Pakistan to attract the carbon offset opportunity.
Yeah,
And any European country is struggling with.
struggling.
Where we can come in.
Or we
Yeah,
can even the simple plantation can work there.
Yeah.
A simple standardized plantation, but validated one can work there.
Yeah.
And it's again dollar-based.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mustafa Saab, PCI, STPI for organizing this. Let me start with the recommendation from Hassan Daud Saab. Recently, we had a workshop in STPI that was focused on capacity building, and that was focused on how emission scenarios would work out, how different emission scenarios would have different cost, economic cost, social cost, and other costs. So I think, yeah, definitely we can have a collaboration on ESG to for capacity building in terms of cost and benefit analysis, and those cost and benefit analysis could be in the form of environmental cost, social cost, and what can be the governance structures. Very good suggestion. It can be done and it should be done. Coming back to ESG, I want to borrow the phrase of carrot and sticks from Bank of Punjab. Firstly, let's just discuss some carrots. First one is Sajid Saab has Sharjit Saab has positively mentioned that economic needs. We need to convey the economic needs of ESG to the investors, to the private sector, to the government sector. And what are those economic needs? First, what is investment theory? Well, there is two runs, short run impacts of investment, and then there are long run impacts of an investment. What investors are looking for, that they get their break even investment back and they get their money back. So I think if we put in climate change into the context, then long run investment are necessary. Long run investments are imperative. So we cannot achieve long run investments without incorporating ESGs. Then second carrot is recently held international conference that was on climate resilient Pakistan. Pakistan is needed to sign a charter of climate resilience because of recent floods. Hassan Daud Bhatt Saab occasionally mentioned that sometimes Pakistan has droughts and sometimes Pakistan has floods. I mean, we transform from one extreme to another extreme. So we need to sign the Charter of Climate Resilience, which cannot be done without green financing. Renewables are part of it. We need sunk investment. We need investment. We have not funds available to build larger renewable energy projects. Then there is capacity building. ESG can be part of it. Lastly, stick. For stick, I think we need to go back to 2015 when Sialkot Chamber of Commerce and Sialkot Industry, which export lots of footballs and sporting equipment, was banned to export for EU because they were having some child labor issues. What EU done, they gave us GSP plus status with a carrot that you need to eliminate that child labor issue. I think in future we are going to have this stick that we need to incorporate ESG into our production lineups, into our private sector, so that we can have our exports. I think this stick can effectively used to promote ESG at private sector. What are the way forward? First one is to advocate ESG on long term as a long term investment. Academicians can play a role. Ayub Saab rightly mentioned that why not we teach ESG principles on schools and college and universities. Then there need to develop consensus on climate resilience. Then lastly, Asian Development Bank has recently announced its energy transition mechanism. In ETM, ADB is giving funds to developing countries so that they can phase out coal and they can bring in the renewable energy projects. Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. Indonesia has made their own ETM of like $4 billion to phase out coal. Pakistan can do it. We can use CPEC and we can bring green investment through a Chinese powered ETM rather than ADB powered ETM. Coal to renewables. And lastly, Saab had mentioned that we need carbon trading. Carbon trading has very vast economic impacts and implications. I think that's it. And lastly, Hassan Dawood Barsab had mentioned that we need to incorporate GDI. GDI is a very, I think we need to understand this as a long-term investment. And we need to build ETM mechanism, energy transition mechanism, through China and through GDI and using other channels as well. Thank you so much.
Very specific interventions. Thank you. Umar, I think you wanted to add
Yes.
something.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask a question from Sajid Saab. So when it comes to ESG reporting, there are several frameworks available in the world. For example, GRI, UNPRI. Yes, and one framework that I studied a lot is that World Economic Forum Stakeholder Capitalism Matrix. Right. So it organizes its matrix into four overarching pillars that are people, planet, prosperity, and principles of governance. Actually, there are 55 different metrics, which are out of them 21 are core and 34 are expanded metrics. So why can't Pakistani companies just adopt those metrics instead of creating a new framework? Because PwC, Pepsi, and Coca-Cola, and around 155 other companies, global companies, are following these metrics. So I think it would be better if Pakistani companies.
So the Pakistan, the direction which Super Pakistan is taking is more the IPAC driven, the ISSB standard. So it used to be SASB. So there's a lot of consolidation.
Sorry. So there's a lot of consolidation which took place in the last couple of years, where the value reporting framework, IFRS, and there are a couple of other organizations who came together in a COP26. They have incorporated a new standard setting board, which is ISSB, which is again, it inherited SASB, which has got already asset classification in 77 different industries. So Pakistan right now is more inclined towards adopting that because Pakistan is already IFRS country. So it's apparently the European or a Commonwealth countries will be going more towards the IFRS, but that's a one reporting standard. TCFD is another one, because if you're working with US organization or a couple of other investors, they have already adopted TCFD. Then the governments have to report the SDGs. The government, because ESG is one of a mechanism which private sector adopt, the government report on SDG level. So the consolidation of the private sector disclosure end up as the part of the SDG initiative at a public sector or a government level. So there will be a couple of reporting standard which will exist. Now there's a reporting standard for the public sector as well on sustainability. So significantly, I think the key driving factor in the European region or European influenced region would be IFRS, which is ISSB, but there will be additional reporting areas which organization will keep adopting are the TCFD, scientific based target initiatives, because investors have adopted that. So there are universal investors like the BlackRock and all those who have invested in everything directly or through indices, and they have required their investee companies that they should report back, and they have already identified a couple of standards. So it's a very evolving domain right now. It's gonna take a couple of years when the world will settle on one or two standards, but through that phase, there are 600 plus standards, directive, framework, and legislation, which in different part of the world, organizations have to use to report their sustainability. And like I mentioned one example of Thailand, which came up with a one report, which is a combination of ISSB and TCFD. So that's mean they have to follow that. But the National Task Force of Pakistan significantly inclined towards the IFRS based, the ISSB standard for Pakistan. So they are not going to create anything new, they will adopt. And I'm sure SCCP will also go for the same concept, rather than creating entirely a new legislation or a standard, adopt the one which exists. And being an IFRS country, we will be ahead once we have to adopt ISSB. So that's the direction which Pakistan may take.
One standard is mandating or required. I think industry specific standard, I think is there because nature of business changes, because with one standard if you evaluate all the key performance of the companies, some of the companies will basically be badly impacted because the reputation, like the mining sector we just discussed. If you compare mining sector with Coca-Cola or otherwise, I think it's like a progression bed, to compare with one standard with just one yardstick, different nature of things. Yeah.
Standards are, if you look at the standard, let's say
Yeah.
if you look at the ISSB, it has already identified 77 industries based on what they have inherited from SASB.
Okay.
GRI also have got 12 industry specific one.
Okay.
So the standard doesn't mean that it's a one standard.
Okay.
The standard means there is a reporting mechanism and it has got their own materiality assessment. Just to give you one example, it's not what you don't have to report everything. There is a materiality assessment concept that what is material for that industry. So for example, if you talk about the energy, the carbon emission may be the primary thing which they are looking at, right? So, but if you look for some other industry, they might have the community or a biodiversity as a one of a primary area which need to be reported more comprehensively. The standard helps when you look at the peer industry and you consolidate and you compare and you benchmark. So this benchmarking can only happen if people are reporting on that. But most of the global organizations are using 3 to 4 standards when they report their sustainability report. If you pick up the pharmaceutical, normally you will find that they have reported based on GRI, TCFD, and scientific based initiative as well. So they have got the 3 component within the sustainability report just to make it easier for their investor, consumer, and regulator to fulfill their compliance requirement, but most importantly, their decision-making requirement.
Okay.
So people are using right now multiple standards to report the same sustainability report annually.
And do they use aggregated metric at the end?
No, they use independent. So there's a GRI based reporting or ISSB reporting, and then in the bottom they have got TCFD one, and some of are using the World Economic Forum guideline as well. Some are using the PRI. There are companies who have used SDG as a basis for reporting as well. So, but they all report are separate. So it's a one report of 80 pages, which I've got maybe 20 pages for each report, but that helps.
But how can one make a decision based on 870 criteria? For example,
it's not 87. There, if you look at the
ranking
variables,
basically will be based on,
it's the investors who are like from Pakistan perspective, the textiles are still reporting on TCFD, and they are like the Zaras of the world have given them a portal to report these key metrics because they have to consolidate there.
They consolidate.
Yeah, so it's your investor who will pick up that which standard they would like to see. Like even the investment banker, when they are making their credit decision, they are not looking at all 4. They already know that what their internal criteria, whether they look at the GRI criteria or this one. That's why the companies are incurring extra costs to report on 4 or 5 different standards, because there are different investors, particularly global organizations who have got the US investor and the European investor and the Asia Pacific investor. So they need to report on a multiple standard, so each investor can see that.
Yeah, okay.
I think this has been a very constructive discourse this morning, and I'm very grateful that there were people from all sections of society representing different sectors, from enterprises to academia to corporates, Chinese, SECP regulators, and former government people as well. I think it's been a very good discussion. I think it's been a consequential discussion. And we will be coming out with a report of all the key points that people have made. And we will also try to ensure that these points are taken and submitted at appropriate forums where they can be at least considered. So it's not lost in translation. And we will also try to see that this discourse is not the last of its kind, but is the first of many that we can actually take forward. And particularly with the context of the third Belt and Road Forum, which is going to take place in May this year, which Hasan Saab, as you know, has not taken place in the past 3 years because of the pandemic. And this is the apex forum for BRI investments all over the world. So perhaps if it's not too ambitious, I think we can even try to share some of these perspectives that we have in this hall and this room at the BRI forum, because we have been there, we've participated in the first and second Belt and Road Forum, and we will be at this Belt and Road Forum in May as well. So I think that this has been very, very good. We will be sharing the proceedings report with each one of you here. And we will also be in touch regarding the upcoming international conference that we are going to be hosting, PCI and SDPI together on this issue to garner international consensus on this. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And again, thank you very much for your time and for your input.